Hey, thanks for tuning in this week. It is great to have you with us today. This Wednesday I had a real treat and it brought me so much joy and pleasure that I wanted to share it with you today. Over the last 2 weeks, Ronnie and I have been watching a couple of great tip parents working really hard to feed their chicks that were in the nest that was in a bird box that Ronnie had made and then put up in our garden. And a week ago, Ronnie had a peek in and managed to take this picture. Looking closely, we thought there were 5 chicks. As the week went by, the noise from this nest box got louder and louder, and the parents were constantly in and out feeding their hungry brood. Well, as we sat down to have supper in the garden on Wednesday, we noticed one of the chicks' faces peeking out, and then came their shoulders, and finally out flew one chick. And then only moments later, there was another peeking out, and then the shoulders, and out it flew. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and finally the 6th chick appeared, squeezed out of the hole and flew into our hedge. It was such a wonderful thing to see, and I even kind of got a bit emotional watching it unfold before my very eyes. But it reminded me of a verse in Deuteronomy, which pictures God as a mother eagle pushing her offspring out of the nest in order to teach them how to fly. Now, those who have studied the ways of an eagle better than I tell us that she makes a wonderful mother. She builds her nest in the tall trees away from the prying hands of men, taking the utmost care to line it with the softest feathers that she can find. And when her eggs hatch and the little eaglets are born, she gives them her complete and undivided attention. Every morning she fills the nest with tasty morsels that keep them going for the whole day. Nothing is too good for her precious brood. After several weeks of this tender, loving care, the mother eagle suddenly changes her behaviour. She knows it is now time for her eaglets to leave the nest and learn to fly. So, reaching down, she rips out the feathers, breaks up the twigs, and overturns their nice, comfortable home. The little eaglets are frightened out of their wits. Gently, she nudges one of the birds towards the edge of the overturned nest and pushes it out into the air. The little bird, of course, falls like a bullet to the ground, squawking with fright. But just as it is about to hit the ground, the mother eagle swoops in beneath it, catches it on her broad wings and carries it safely up into the sky. But then she tilts her wing and the bird falls once again, but this time, as it flaps its wings in fright, it discovers that it can fly. And when the mother eagle has taught the first of her eaglets to fly, she repeats the process with all the others until every one of her offspring are out of the nest and safely in the air. And this is what God does with you and me sometimes. He pushes us out of our comfortable nests, not to hurt us, but in order that we might expand our wings and learn to fly and soar towards his highest purpose. Maybe that's you today. You feel like your world's been ripped apart, turned upside down. Perhaps you feel afraid. Maybe you feel like you're falling like a bullet to the ground. Well, you know what? God is closer than you think. And he will catch you on his broad, strong wings and carry you up and get you to the place where you stretch your wings and learn to fly. Isaiah reminds us that those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. And Isaiah tells us that the eagles soar, not flap. Although, of course, an eagle is well able to use its wings to propel itself across the sky, its typical pose is that of soaring. And an eagle will sometimes perch on a high rock and wait for a while, testing the wind. And when it feels the right wind blowing, it expands its wings and is at once lifted by the breeze into the great heights. And every trial and difficulty that comes our way, there is a breeze that if we wait for and take advantage of, will lift us and allow us to soar. Now, last week, Fiona kicked us off as we started out on our new series entitled Seeing Clearly. I don't know how your eyesight is, but ever since I turned 50, almost 7 years ago now, my vision has got worse with each passing day. I'm finding it harder and harder to read labels, especially on food items or washing instructions. I think I can see, but it's not until I put my glasses on that I can really see. And Fiona got us thinking about that last week. How do we see God? And she encouraged us to look at him through the lens of Jesus. And in particular, she looked at Jesus' love and compassion as he healed the blind man. Now, when we actually say the blind man, it could actually have been an older teenager. We know that in Jewish culture, a boy becomes a man at his bar mitzvah at the age of 13. So he could well have been 14, 15, 16. But what a wonderful thing to happen for him, his family, and within the community. Someone born blind, and then he could see. What celebrations there must have been, what joy. He must have been the talk of the town, and Jesus, well, he must have been hailed a hero. Well, let's see if that's how it turns out. Then they, that's the healed man's friends and neighbours, took the man who had been born blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put the mud over my eyes and then I washed it away and I could see. Now, wouldn't you expect that the response would have been one of great joy and celebration and perhaps wonder? Well, let's read on. Some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God, for he's working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Isn't it interesting that even within this group of religious leaders, there were different ways of thinking? Some of them thought, well, godly people submit to the rules. Jesus overrides the rules, therefore Jesus cannot be from God. Whilst others were thinking, well, only God can have the power to heal blindness, and Jesus healed this blind man, therefore Jesus must be from God. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? And the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. Now, what a great place for this guy to start. He was on a journey of faith. His sight had been restored, and I'm sure that he was going to look at Jesus, perhaps follow him, listen to what he said, learn from him, and then seek to live out the way that Jesus calls people to live. Jesus himself would show this man that he was so much more than a prophet, but it was a good place for him to start. However, the Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see. So they called his parents and they asked them, is this your son? Was he born blind? And if so, how can he see? And his parents replied, we know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he is old enough, ask him. I find this so sad that the religious leaders had created such fear in people. These parents should have been shouting from the rooftops, filled with such joy that their son had been healed and restored back to them. And yet what do we see? They were afraid. So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. I don't know whether he's a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind and now I can see. I love this man's response. I don't know whether he's a sinner. You claim you know, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Because to me, all the evidence points in a different direction. He says, I don't know, but what I do know is that I was blind and now I can see. Isn't that amazing? You see, we don't always have to have all the answers, do we? We can tell our story and tell folks what Jesus has done for us. But what did he do? They asked. How did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? I think this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, don't you? Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has ever been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. You were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. What a sad and difficult set of interactions between the church and religious leaders and the healed man and his family. What had happened for these leaders to be so cold and so interested in a set of rules and laws over and above the miracle that had taken place? Where was the love? How were these leaders pointing people to a loving God by their actions? I don't know. But it feels to me that these leaders had an emphasis on religion rather than relationship. And one thing I do know about our living God is that he wants relationship with you and me. So what can we learn from this account? Well, as I was reading it through, I thought, do you know what? I don't want to be like these religious leaders. I so desire to have the Father heart of God, to see people as he sees them, to value life and relationship and love in the way that he does, to know that every life is important to him, and therefore I need to treat people in a way that truly reflects that. And I hope and pray that Turning Point Church will be a group of people known for their love for each other and the community of Forres and surrounding area. Well, how do we do that? Well, I think it comes by learning about our God. You know, Fiona told us last week that the best way to know and see God is through the life of Jesus. So let's learn together so we see him clearly and through the right lens, so that we have an accurate picture of who he is and what he calls us to. But it also comes through listening to the Spirit, to what the Spirit is saying through his word, through others, and through his work in our own lives. And it also comes through living what we learn by loving others well every chance that we get. So our God calls us not to religion, but to relationship. Let's learn, listen, live and love as he wants us to, so that we reflect him well and others see him clearly too.